Dead or alive, you're coming with me. Here is an all-new action reaction in which I'll be reviewing Robocop 3, and we'll finish the trilogy. Robocop 3 is directed by Fred Dekker. It stars Robert John Burke as Robocop, Nancy Allen as Officer Ann Lewis, Remy Ryan as Nico, Jill Hennessy as Dr. Marie Lazarus, Rip Torn as OCP's CEO, Mako as Keimitsu, John Castle as Paul McDaggett, CCH Pounder as Bertha, Stanley Anderson as Zach, Daniel Von Bargen as Marino, and Stephen Root as Kuntz. It's been some time since Robocop put an end to the nuke production, and things have dramatically changed since. Though OCP CEO known as the Old Man has gone, his Delta City project has begun, but not before OCP's buyout by the Japanese robotic company known as Keimitsu. It has formed its own police force to flush people out from their homes and send them to OCP's special rehabilitation program. However, a little girl named Nico escapes the program and is now with a group of rebels. Robocop and his partner Ann Lewis come upon activity at a church, where the OCP force, led by a man named Paul McDaggett, is about to wipe out the rebels and their families. Robocop is heavily damaged by McDaggett's forces and Ann Lewis is killed. Meanwhile, the new CEO of OCP receives notice that Keimitsu will help with the construction of Delta City, sending Atomo, their ninja android, to assist. When the rebels repair Robocop, he seeks out McDaggett, unaware that Atomo is hunting him down. And yeah, that's pretty much what Robocop 3 is about, as I finish the Robocop trilogy reviews. What do I think of this? Well, there's a lot of people who do not like it. It's not that great of a film, not a good sequel. It's PG-13 compared to Rated R because Orion Pictures at the time wanted a more kid-centric Robocop since they had the animated series out. So they started production of this around 1991, and it was supposed to be released in 92. Well, Orion was going through bankruptcy, basically, and it was held off until 1993, even though it was filmed in 91. And because of that, I can see why people don't like it as much as the other two. However, me personally, in my personal opinion, I actually like it better than number 2. I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for that, but nothing can beat the original Robocop. But to me, Robocop 3 felt more like the first film. Whether it's the score from Vasil Polidoris, I don't know what it was, but something about it felt more inherently Robocop besides the score and just references to the first film. Something about it had that Robocop feeling that number 2 was lacking, in my opinion, even if it softened up a bit. Fred Dekker directed this film. He also did The Monster Squad and wrote House and House 2, the second story. He also wrote some episodes for Star Trek Enterprise and did an episode of Tales from the Crypt in Season 2. His direction is not bad in this. He's expressed certain things about the film that he wished he did differently. He liked the end result, but ultimately he said he was very limited with the budget. He wished he got more of the violence and just kind of sarcasm and just the political stuff that was in the first film. In addition to having more martial arts and having a stunt team to where he could basically have the fight scenes the way he imagined them, like from the old fighting films and stuff. And you didn't really get to see that. And I understand that. And Frank Miller, again, did the story. Fred Dekker did the screenplay. And Frank Miller basically was just bashing the studio because they didn't go with his ideas, and I don't blame him. This is a watered-down version of his ideas. They neutered his original story ideas, which you can again see in Frank Miller's Robocop graphic novel. You can tell he had a bigger idea for number 2 and 3, and they just totally butchered his story twice. So much that he didn't want to work in Hollywood again until Robert Rodriguez approached him to make Sin City. This was watered down a bit, and this is also the only Robocop without Peter Weller in the original trilogy. Robert John Burke replaces him. Peter Weller, since it was filmed in 1991, it was going to conflict with a movie called Naked Lunch, and Peter Weller didn't want to basically give up his role in Naked Lunch to reprise Robocop, so they recasted him with Robert John Burke.
And this suit goes back to the silver suit, and the reason why that is it's Peter Weller's actual Robocop suit, one design that they're going to make for Robocop 2 that they never used. So Robert John Burke pretty much said the major complaint about it, since he's taller than Peter Weller, is that it was a little bit too tight for his height. And I can kind of see that, but Robert John Burke does a great job. As a kid, this was the first Robocop I ever saw. As a matter of fact, the only reason why I saw the original Robocop is because I thought I was buying this Robocop. I saw it on HBO, and I thought it was this film. Oh boy, was it a lot more violent, but I loved it. Anyways, it took years later to find out that this is Robocop 3. I love the story. Yeah, it has OCP making Delta City, and they're forcing people out of their neighborhoods. There's a theme with social classes, and it's a theme that's actually very relevant today with corporate America. And it's crazy. They pretty much put them into detention centers, but they really don't do that. They basically kill them. It's like pre-purge. And this little girl gets out, and she finds this team of rebels. And I like CCH Pounder's role. She does a great job. She's a voice of Amanda Waller in Justice League. She's in many films. But I like her role as the rebels. I like the rebels. They're just everyday Joes, men and women, just trying to survive. And I like that. It's something very different. It brings almost like a war element to this Robocop film. With it being watered down, they do have it kind of very much like an 80s, 90s comic book or cartoon. So out of all the Robocops, this is probably like the most comic book out of the Robocops. The way it feels and everything. You have the splatter punks at the beginning. It feels very almost like Dark Knight Returns in a way. Nancy Allen returns as Ann Lewis, and she was only going to return on the condition that they kill off her character, so that's why she gets killed off in this. But again, going to Robert John Burke, I liked his performance. When he doesn't have the mask, it looks like Peter Weller's Robocop. Like, I couldn't tell it was a different person. However, when I was older, the voice does sound very different. It sounds more robotic. And it's just like, can I help your officer? And it's like, by resisting arrest. And he has like this weird kind of robotic voice. That was very different than Peter Weller's. Peter Weller still sounded a little human. This one sounds like they're going out of their way to make it sound robotic. But besides that, I think he does a wonderful job, and it's very seamless in the way he goes into it as Robocop, especially when he's Murphy, when he unveils his face out of the helmet. He's very much like Murphy from the last two. I like the actress who plays Dr. Lazarus. She does a good job, and they give her a lot more to do with Murphy, and also with the rebels and stuff towards the end. She has a more pivotal role in the third act. John Daggett, yeah, he's almost like the British Steve Martin. I don't know. He's gray-haired, and he's just a douchebag. I hate him in this. He plays a really ruthless villain. Not as ruthless as Kane or Clarence Bonniger, but you can just tell that this guy's just a piece of shit that you just can't really root for. Like, he's just something about him just really gets under your skin. But not necessarily in the way that the previous two villains did. He's just more of like an authoritative figure, and in a way almost a coward until Robocop confronts him at the very end, and even in the middle. Rip Torn is a new CEO. The actor who played the old man, and the first two passed away before Robocop 3 was made, so they have Rip Torn as a CEO. Ultimately, it's one of those films that is not very good, but it's almost like a guilty pleasure. I actually highly enjoy it. The limitations, of course, bog the film down, the story, the way they have Robocop, and it being PG-13, but ultimately, it's really, really dated now, where certain parts that I really like the part where he flies, I love that scene. That scene was just so badass, seeing Robocop get the jetpack and fly like pre-Iron Man. That has aged horribly. That looks so bad now. Like, I don't know. I don't remember it looking that bad when I first saw it. I thought it looked amazing, and I was just like, oh god, this is really aged bad between that and the acting and story. It's just one of those films that truly does just belong in the 90s. Like, it's just one of those films that shouldn't go any further. But I still love watching it because I grew up watching Robocop. Yeah, I always wanted one of those action figures. Those action figures are going around that made it PG-13 as like giant metal action figure. Never got one. Instead, I have the one I showed you at the beginning of this review. Anyway, I digress. Story-wise, it's a very strong story, I feel. Again, with the social class thing, and then it continues on the Delta City plot line from Robocop 2. But when the film really gets going is when Robocop and Lewis finds these team of rebels and the little girl. he starts having flashbacks to his son and thinking about that. And I like this because Robocop and Robocop 2, they made him purely a machine. Well, at the end of 1, he became Murphy. He found some of himself again. This film actually remembers that he's Murphy. At the beginning, Ann Lewis is in trouble with the Splatterpunks. He basically disobeys orders to save his partner and not go after the rebels, and I like that. It shows more of the man part of him than the machine. And that's what OCP fears in this film. They fear that he may go rogue and they can't control him. On that note, there's a part where, again, Ann Lewis and Robocop find these team of rebels at a church. That dad gets there, they find out what they're really doing to these people. They're basically driving them out of their homes and killing them. And to stop that, Ann Lewis gets shot. Now, of course, she's not wearing her vest. That always happens in movies, but the actress did want the character to be killed off, so it makes sense in this regard. But really, you're just like, why didn't she wear a vest? That didn't make sense. Why would she do that without wearing a vest? But if she wanted to be killed off, it makes sense. But in a way, I'm glad because it adds a revenge element back in Robocop that the first film had. The second film was more of him as a police officer, which isn't bad, going after an enemy. But I like how when Lewis dies, it creates a revenge plot. He gets severely injured. They basically shoot like a freaking M82 grenade launcher gun at him. Damages his armor, the chassis metal in his chest. So the rebels basically take him under the tunnels, and he's like recuperating there in the middle of the film. But it's just so sad seeing his partner die. That was the only other person besides his family that knew him when he was Murphy, before he was Robocop. He really has nothing left. And that adds another element not only to the character, but to the film and the drive of Robocop and how he's with these rebels and why. And that's another thing the director said. It was a very unpopular thing to have Robocop join, like, poor people rebels going against a corporation. I don't know why, because I see it happening in America now. A freaking Detroit is pretty much like Detroit and Robocop now. Like, it's nuts, but it just adds another element. They go to their base, and it was cool. There's basically like an abandoned warehouse. They filmed this in Atlanta, Georgia, and there are some buildings getting ready to be demolished, and they pretty much use those vacant buildings, so that was kind of cool. And you get the whole flashback stuff to when he died, and Clarence Bonniger and them killing him in the first. And anyway, that's when Dr. Lazarus helps, and then you have a traitor. Yeah, the freaking dad from Mike and Dave Need Wedding Dates. He's in a lot of stuff, but I remember him in this first. He betrays them. And yeah, they basically get killed, and now the main girl, Miko, is with Dr. Lazarus, and it's Robocop. But now Robocop's back online. But there's a cool whole subplot. The Japanese pretty much took over OCP. Automo and CCH Pounder's character, the Rebel Leader, are both based on Frank Miller creations. Of course, Automo is like the android ninja in Ronin. And he's actually a really cool character. I like it. Some of it's a little bit cheesy when his face cracks and stuff, but I just like it because he can blend into the normal world. He's not entirely a machine. In a way, he's almost like a freaking martial arts Terminator. I like his character. I like it where he's like trying to find Robocop and the rebels, and there's a whole cool other subplot of somebody else after him. And yeah, they get to fight. And that's one of my problems with this film is and the sequels. They make Robocop a total wimp. He gets his butt kicked, man, and I don't like it. The first Robocop, sure, there may have been some fights where he's like maybe getting beat up a bit, but he would have stood a better chance than he did in Robocop 3. Hell, Robocop 2 he could even fight, and he was still getting his butt kicked. I just didn't like it where he's just like, you must stop, you are under arrest, and then the guy ninja just kicks him, and he just goes down like a trash can. I just don't like that. That doesn't feel like Robocop. When I was little, I could understand it, but now I'm just like, why? And going on the kid notes, you could tell that they added accessories for toys. But I do like how they added a little, like, blaster cannon where you can remove his hand, add a blaster cannon, and then the jetpack was cool. But ultimately, I'm like, why does he need that when he had the gun holster? I don't know. You could tell they were trying to sell toys and make it more kid-friendly, which really goes against the character. I can look past those, but then you have Daggett, and then, like, criminals basically being a part of his force. The police go on strike, and now they're with the people. So you have this whole, like, police, everyday civilian against the corporation, these criminals, and it's almost like a pre-Dark Knight Rises, really. I like that whole fight scene and how overpowered they are, and then when Robocop comes to save the day. Such an awesome movie. And I like the actor who plays the Chief. He's great in all three movies, and he really gets a lot more to do in this film. And then ultimately, when he faces Daggett, it's just badass. Just crashes the building. And then it's just like, how can I help you, officer? And he's like, by resisting arrest. I just love that. Then you have the whole fight, and that's kind of a little cheesy with the hacking and them cutting their heads off, but maybe it had to do with the production limitations. I don't know. And some of the effects are a bit dated with the whole nuke thing, and then just like the flash. But I love the ending where it's just like, Murphy, is that your name? And it's just like, my friends call me Murphy, you call me Robocop. And it felt very much like the first film and kind of a perfect close for this trilogy. Oh yeah, going with the whole children thing, when he's after Daggett, I like it where he basically like freaking lights up the police station on fire and is going after the men. But then they have like a Terminator 3 type of thing where he's like in a pink Pitmobile. I didn't like that. Well, anyway, besides me going through like the whole movie and everything, this does have its shortcomings and it does have its pros. Pros, it feels more like the first Robocop, the score is back. They even have at the beginning, I'd buy that for $1 ad. And I like the story and the driving force and ultimately the theme and feeling of it and him going after these people, Dr. Lazarus, the kid. You get to see Ed 209, and the jetpack was a cool addition. A little bit ahead of its time, maybe too ambitious for this film. Cons, the story, the dialogue is really dated and kind of bad, but it's a guilty pleasure. But ultimately, they just make Robocop a complete wimp in this, and I really didn't like it. It kind of lacked the brutality that the first two films had. But that's not Fred Decker's fault, that's the studio. And I think with the limitations, it also hurt it that Orion Pictures was basically going bankrupt during the making of this. Again, the Game Boy game of Robocop 2 even said, see Robocop for all ages in 1992, and it didn't come out till 1993. I have the VHS of this, and I own the Blu-ray, so as a fan, and the first Robocop I saw, I like it. Now, I know many people do not like this film. I still think it's better than the remake, not to even mention that. But yeah, for PG-13, this is one of the better PG-13 sequels in my honest opinion. It goes up there with Live Free or Die Hard, The Expendables 3, Another Stakeout. It's one of the better PG-13 sequels to an R film. But yeah, despite all its shortcomings, ultimately what I think of in Robocop 3 and the sequels, it feels like Men in Black or like Matrix, where I could watch all three, but the first ones were just so great. And maybe this should have just been one movie. Maybe this should not have had a sequel. But then you do have sequels, and even though they're enjoyable to watch, you can't help but think, what could have been? You know, when you sat down watching the first film, you're like, I wonder what this movie would be like if it had a sequel, and what it would be like, and then you see the end result, and then it's just like, that's what it's like? It feels like that. It feels like when you watch the Men in Black sequels or the Matrix sequels after seeing the originals, and it's just like, wow, that's what they did with it? It kind of feels like that to me. But I do like Robocop 3 better than Robocop 2. In just many ways, it just feels more Robocop. Not saying all of them are like the best movies ever. It's not the Citizen Kane movies. The first one, the original Robocop's always going to be special and the best out of the trilogy. But to me, as a viewer and just entertainment value, this one felt more enjoyable to watch as a Robocop film. So if I had to give it a score, I would probably give it a B- and a 3 out of 5. I know that might be a little high for this film, but I actually enjoyed it. Call it a guilty pleasure of mine, but I really, really loved Robocop 3. And everything about it is a good conclusion to the Robocop trilogy. And Shout Factory's about to release a collector's edition of 2 and 3. And of course, you didn't have Robocop after this. It was just Prime Directives, a TV show, and then of course, I don't want to mention what came after those, but Robocop was a very interesting idea. Fred Decker, besides the limitations, said that the story drew its close in the original film. Like, there wasn't really much to do with the character afterwards, and I agree. You can tell the sequels are just trying to cash grab or recreate the magic of the first one, when really the story was already told. But this did something different. It felt very much like a comic book movie where it's just like a different type of gangs and then just like the rebels against these other people. I just felt like it was maybe too ambitious and the ideas were bigger than the execution. Ultimately, Robocop 2 and 3 had a lot of good ideas, but the execution was poor. Yeah, that is my action reaction of Robocop 3. Again, if you want to see Frank Miller's original ideas come to fruition, check out Frank Miller's Robocop. He also had a cameo in Robocop 2, which is cool, but It's sad that Fred Dekker didn't direct more stuff after this. I thought this was entertaining, and I really liked his work in The Monster Squad, a very underrated film. Anyway, that's it for Action Reaction. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Did you like this movie? Did you hate this movie? Would you buy this movie for $1? Anyway, just let me know your thoughts below. And what's your favorite Robocop? What are your favorite moments? And if you like this, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and check out my other stuff on the channel. And on the next Action Reaction, on March Madness, I'm going to be going over Lethal Weapon 2, 3, and 4. And then on my 20th episode of Action Reaction, we're going to be going to the roads of Valhalla, shiny and chrome, with Mad Max Fury Road. Anyway, take it easy, guys. See y'all later. On the eve of this Easter, Alex Murphy died for our sins and was resurrected as Robocop. And it is a beautiful thing.